So like today let us see with respect to the try, catch and finally block. Okay. So basically the finally block is always executes. So that's like in the previous sessions, like we have seen with respect to the try block and the catch block, right? So try is basically the block where we try to write a code, and catch is a block where we used to handle that particular exception, right? So this is a try and a catch block. So today, like we are seeing with respect to the finally block, it is also a block. Okay. So in Java, the finally block is used in exception handling to define a block of code that will always execute after a try block, regardless of whether an exception has occurred or not. It is mainly used to close resource like file streams, database connections to prevent resource leak. Okay. So that is known as a finally block. So what is a finally block? Finally block is nothing but like this. Where it is written in combination with try block or try catch finally block. Okay. And why it is used? It is used to perform the cleanup activity of the code that we have written inside the try block. For example, consider that we have a try block and we have written some set of code. Okay. For example, we have established the connection to read file utils or to read a file. Now what happens? We are trying to read some code. At that time exception has occurred. Like for example, the file is not present, but we have opened the file connection. So even though the exception has occurred, the finally block will help us in clean up those activity of the code. Okay, it will help us in cleaning up activity of the code or the connections that we have opened with respect to the try block. So there we go with this finally block. So even though an exception has occurred or exception has not occurred, the finally block will be executed. Okay. Now this will be the syntax, guys. Finally. Okay. Finally. Open close braces. Okay. Now let us see with respect to this particular code. Okay. Let me try to take the same code that we have and let me try to switch to Eclipse and let me try to show you guys that how it works with respect to the Eclipse. Okay. So let me try to delete this entire thing and let me try to have the code that I have written. Okay. Here what we are doing is, here we are trying to perform. So basically, like I have taken the same code that we have. So here what we are doing is, here we have a try block. Okay. We have a try block, and in this try block we are getting arithmetic exception, right? We are getting an arithmetic exception. So how will be the execution of the code that happens with respect to this execution is, first whenever we start, it will start from line 8. Okay. At line 8 we have a try block, right? We have a try. In this we have written some line of code that is causing us arithmetic exception, right? So whenever there is an exception has occurred inside a try block, the execution goes under catch block, right? And it will try to print this particular set of statement, that is cannot divide by 0. It's just a println statement it will try to print. Okay. Now what has happened? An exception has occurred, catch block is executed. Even then the finally block will be executed after the catch block. So the execution will be first execute try block, exception has occurred, execute catch block. Now once the catch block is done, execute the finally block. Okay. So this is how the execution happened with respect to when the exception has occurred. Okay. Now let us see how it behaves when I execute this line of code. See, here we have seen the exception. Am I seeing the exception thrown, guys? No, I am not seeing. Why? I have handled the exception. I have handled the exception with the help of try catch block. Okay. Just a minute, guys. Okay. So how the execution happens? The execution happens like this. Whenever we are trying to execute some line of code, first try block will be executed, followed by catch block, followed by finally block. And I was stating that we cannot see the exception. Why? The exception is handled. For example, if I am trying to write this line of code here, okay, and if I'm trying to comment all these lines of code, and now if I execute, you can see the exception. An exception has occurred. What kind of exception? It is an arithmetic exception, divide by 0 error, right? This is how an exception has occurred if I have not included the int result is equals to 10 divided by 0 line of code inside a try block. But if I have included, as I have done here, inside a try block, then in this case we are trying to handle the exception. Okay, in this case I am handling this particular exception, okay, with the help of try and a catch block. So how the execution will be now? First, try block will be executed, catch block, as there is an exception, this will be executed, and finally block will be executed even though an exception has occurred or not occurred. Now, is there is an exception? Yes, there is an exception. So now run as Java application. See, even though there is an exception, it is handled with catch block. And once there is an exception has occurred, finally catch block is executed. Finally block will always be executed. Okay, finally block will be executed even though there is an exception has occurred or not. Exception has occurred or not. Now we have seen when exception has occurred. Now let us try to see and when an exception has not occurred. How I am telling that exception has occurred? Because catch block is executed in this code, right? You can see here, cannot divide by 0. Where it is? It is inside the catch block. This is printed. So that means exception has occurred. Now I'll make the code in a way that exception will not occur. For example, I'll try to just remove like 2. I'll just try to remove 0 and I'll try to add it as 2. Now see, run as Java application. Am I seeing this line of code in the output? No, because in this case the exception will not be occurred. So catch block will not get executed. Even though the exception has occurred or not occurred, finally block will be executed. So that is been happening here. So that is the use of finally block. Finally block is basically used to perform the cleanup activity of the code for the code that we have written in the try block. For example, it might be with respect to closing up the connections with respect to the IOs, or it might be with any other connection that we have created. So for that cleanup activity, we will be writing inside the finally block. Why we will be writing inside the finally block? Because we want the connection to be closed even though an exception has occurred or not, so that to avoid memory leakage, to avoid resource leakage, okay, to prevent resource leak, we do that. So that is the use of finally block. Okay. Okay. So this was with respect to the finally block. Okay. Now let us see, there are a few conventions or there are few things that need to be remembered when we are trying to deal with respect to the finally block. Okay. So most commonly repeated interview questions, guys, that we see. So that let me try to put in here. Okay. So the most common interview questions is, can we write a finally block without a catch block? Can we write a finally block without a catch block? The answer is yes, we can write finally block without a catch block. See, is there an exception? No exception block. We have written only try block, only finally block. No compile time error and no runtime error also. See, like this, right? So the interview question will be like this: can we write a finally block without a catch block? We should say yes, we can write a catch block. We can write a finally block without catch block, but it should be written after try block. Can we write a finally block alone like this? No, we cannot write. There will be a compile time. We have to enclose, or we have to write after a try block, finally block, or we have to write the finally block after exception block. But we cannot write individually like this: exception, exception, catch, exception. Okay, like this. Like this we can write after. What is the spelling? This exception. Oh, see, like this. Okay, so we can write a catch. We can write a finally block after a catch block. Okay, but we cannot write a finally block individually. Can we write a catch block directly without a try block? No, we cannot write. We should write always a try block, then catch block, then finally block. But we can write finally block even without catch block also. Okay, so this is one thing. The second thing is how to skip, or the second question that is most repeated with respect to the finally block is how to skip finally block. How to skip? So in order to skip the finally block, we can write something like this. Okay, system dot exit of 0, like this. If we write like this, hope it should skip the finally block. See, the finally block is skipped. I'll write like this. I'll just try to include one statement. This block is try block. Okay, I'm just trying to write one statement. So if I execute now, I'll write it here because even this will also be skipped. Okay, so run as Java application. See, this block is try block. Where it is? It is inside try block. So how to skip the execution of the finally block? With the help of system.exit of 0, we can try to skip the finally block execution. Okay, so this is the most repeated interview questions with respect to the finally block. Okay, so what is the use of finally block? The use of finally block is to perform the cleanup activity of the code with respect to the resource connection open, or to prevent the resource leak, and it will be executed even though an exception has occurred or not occurred. In that particular case, we go with the finally block. And this is the syntax. Finally is always a case sensitive. We have to write finally block with this kind of case only. We cannot write it as capital. Like this, we cannot write. We should always write finally block with smaller case. Okay. And whenever we are trying to write, we should always write after a try block, or try to write after a catch block, but we cannot write individually. Okay, so that is the main usage of the finally block. And how to skip the finally block? With the help of system.exit, we can try to skip the finally block. Clear? So this is basically the usage of the finally block, guys.